It was a calm evening, and the house felt emptier than usual with Mum and Dad away for the weekend. They had asked Uncle Jake to stay with me, just to make sure everything was all right while they were gone. Though I was 19 and could handle myself, my parents were always cautious. Uncle Jake had always been like a big brother to me, and we were used to him visiting often. That night, I was finding it hard to sleep. Maybe it was the unusual quietness in the house, or the fact that it felt different without my parents around. I tossed and turned, looking at the clock. It was just past midnight. The silence was making me restless, and I decided to get out of bed. I walked down the stairs to get a glass of water from the kitchen. The light in the living room was dim, and there, I saw Uncle Jake asleep on the couch. He had fallen asleep with the TV on, the low volume barely noticeable. I smiled slightly, thinking how peaceful everything seemed. I didn't want to wake him up, but for some reason, I found myself walking over to where he was. "Uncle Jake," I whispered softly, not wanting to startle him. He stirred slightly, but didn't wake up. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I should just leave him to rest. But something made me tap him lightly on the arm. Maybe I just needed to feel like I wasn't the only one awake in the house. He opened his eyes slowly, blinking in the dim light. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice groggy from sleep. "Nothing's wrong," I replied, feeling a bit silly. "I just couldn't sleep." He sat up a little, rubbing his eyes. "You all right? Do you need anything?" "No, I'm fine. I just felt, I don't know, a bit restless, I guess," I said, shrugging. "Well, you know what they say, sometimes it helps to just talk it out," Uncle Jake suggested, giving me a kind smile. "Why don't you sit down for a minute?" I hesitated, but then decided to sit on the arm of the couch. We chatted for a bit, mostly about random things. Family, school, nothing too deep. It felt nice to talk, and for a moment, I forgot about the uneasy feeling that had kept me awake. Uncle Jake had always been someone easy to talk to, and even now, he was good at making everything feel lighter. Sitting there on the edge of the couch, I found myself feeling more at ease. Uncle Jake had always been the type of person who made you feel comfortable. Like no matter what you said, he'd understand. We sat in the dimly lit living room, our conversation flowing in an easy, relaxed way. The TV, still on low, cast a soft glow across the room, but we barely paid attention to it. "So, what's been on your mind lately?" Uncle Jake asked, leaning back against the couch with a casual smile. He looked more awake now, his usual light-hearted nature returning. I shrugged, unsure how to answer. "I don't know. I guess I've just been feeling a bit off lately. Nothing serious, but sometimes I get in these moods, you know?" He nodded thoughtfully, as if he understood exactly what I meant. "Yeah, I get it. It happens to everyone. Sometimes the quiet makes you overthink things." "Exactly," I said, feeling relieved that he didn't push me to explain more. "It's just one of those nights, I guess." We kept talking, and before I knew it, an hour had passed. It was strange how time moved faster when you were distracted by a good conversation. I felt lighter now, the weight of the restless thoughts that had kept me awake fading as we spoke. Uncle Jake had a way of making everything seem simpler, more manageable. "I don't know how you do it," I said with a small laugh. "You always know what to say." He smiled back, leaning his head against the couch cushion. "I don't know if I always know, but I try. Sometimes just listening is all you need." There was a pause then, a comfortable silence. The kind where words weren't necessary anymore. I realized I felt more relaxed than I had all evening. Maybe it was just knowing someone else was there in the house with me. Or maybe it was the conversation itself that had helped. "Thanks for listening," I said after a moment, breaking the silence. "I didn't mean to wake you up for nothing." "You didn't wake me for nothing," he said kindly. "If you need to talk, you need to talk. I'd rather be awake than have you stressing over things." I smiled, appreciating his kindness. It was easy to forget sometimes how much he cared about family. Uncle Jake was always the one who showed up when we needed him, whether it was for small things like this or something more important. "Anyway," I said, standing up and stretching, "I think I'll try to get some sleep now, thanks again." "No problem," he replied. "If you can't sleep, just let me know." I nodded and started walking back to the stairs, feeling a lot better than when I had come down. But as I reached the foot of the stairs, I turned back to look at him one more time. He was settling back into the couch, preparing to drift off again. There was something comforting in knowing he was just downstairs, ready to help if I needed him. I headed upstairs, feeling a lot less alone. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to settle back into sleep, but something still didn't feel quite right. The conversation with Uncle Jake had helped, but now that I was back in my room, my thoughts started creeping in again, keeping me wide awake. It wasn't anything specific, just an unsettling feeling I couldn't shake. After tossing and turning for another hour, I finally gave in. Sleep wasn't coming anytime soon. I quietly got out of bed again, thinking I'd just grab a snack and try reading for a bit. Maybe that would help. As I crept down the stairs for the second time that night, I noticed the TV was still on in the living room. Uncle Jake hadn't turned it off before he fell back asleep. I walked over quietly, trying not to disturb him. He was stretched out on the couch, looking peaceful again. It was then that I realized something strange, this feeling of comfort I had when he was around. It wasn't just because he was family. There was something deeper, an odd sense of connection that I hadn't noticed before. I found myself questioning it, wondering why I felt more secure with him than I had with anyone else. Was it just because he was there when I needed him most? Or was there something about Uncle Jake that made me feel safe in a way I couldn't explain? I shook my head, trying to dismiss those thoughts. It didn't make sense. I was overthinking again, just like I always did when I couldn't sleep. I walked into the kitchen and grabbed a glass of water, taking slow sips as I leaned against the counter, trying to clear my mind. But the thoughts wouldn't leave me alone. I kept replaying our conversation in my head, thinking about how easy it was to talk to him. It wasn't just that he listened. It was how he made me feel understood, without judgment. Before I knew it, I was standing in the doorway of the living room again. Uncle Jake stirred slightly, shifting on the couch as if sensing my presence. I thought about going back upstairs, but something made me walk over to him instead. Maybe I just needed to feel that comfort again, that connection that had somehow settled my nerves earlier. Still awake, Uncle Jake's voice broke the silence, his eyes half open as he looked at me. Yeah, I couldn't sleep, I admitted, feeling embarrassed that I was bothering him again. He sat up, yawning and stretching his arms. You need to relax, kid. You're overthinking again, aren't you? I shrugged, not knowing how to answer. I guess. Uncle Jake gave me a sympathetic look, patting the cushion next to him. Come here, you're making yourself crazy. I hesitated for a moment, but eventually sat down next to him. He was right. I was getting worked up over nothing. Sitting there, I realized how grateful I was to have someone like him in my life. I wasn't alone, not when he was around. That realization brought a strange sense of comfort, one that I hadn't expected. Thanks, Uncle Jake, I said softly, looking at him as I leaned back against the couch. For what? He asked, his expression softening. For just being here. He smiled warmly, his eyes filled with that same understanding I'd felt earlier. That's what family's for. As we sat there in the dimly lit living room, the house felt quiet, almost too quiet. Uncle Jake's presence beside me, though comforting, was also making me more aware of my thoughts. I leaned back into the couch, letting out a deep breath as I stared ahead, trying to calm the restlessness inside me. You know, you're really overthinking things, Uncle Jake said, his voice low, as if he could sense my inner turmoil. I know, I said softly, still unsure of how to express what was going on in my mind. It's just, sometimes it's hard to turn off the noise in my head. He nodded, leaning back as well, both of us falling into a silence that wasn't awkward, but rather filled with unspoken understanding. That's what made Uncle Jake different. He didn't need to pry, didn't need to force me to explain everything, he just got it. Sometimes all you need is to remind yourself that things aren't as complicated as they seem, he said after a moment, glancing at me with a small, reassuring smile. You're not alone, no matter what it feels like. His words struck a chord with me, and I realized just how much I had been letting my worries spiral. The comfort I felt with Uncle Jake wasn't just because he was family, but because he had a way of grounding me, of making things feel simple again. I guess I just needed someone to talk to, I admitted, to remind me of that. He nodded, his eyes reflecting the same warmth he'd always shown me. Anytime, kid. That's what I'm here for. We sat in silence again, but this time the silence felt different, lighter. The tension that had been nagging at me all night was gone, replaced by a quiet sense of peace. I leaned my head back against the cushion, more relaxed than I had all evening. Uncle Jake shifted beside me, and I glanced over at him. "You should get some sleep," I said, smiling softly. "I've kept you up long enough." He chuckled lightly. "I don't mind, but yeah, you should probably head to bed too." I stood up, stretching a little, and turned to face him. "Thanks again, Uncle Jake, for everything." "Anytime," he replied. I started heading back up the stairs, feeling a sense of relief that I hadn't felt when the night began. I knew now that no matter how complicated things seemed in my head, I wasn't facing them alone. Uncle Jake had been there for me tonight in a way I hadn't even realized I needed, as someone who listened, understood, and didn't expect anything more than honesty from me. As I climbed into bed, the restlessness from earlier had disappeared. I knew the next time things got overwhelming, I wouldn't hesitate to reach out, just like I had tonight. The weight that had been pressing on my chest was gone, replaced by the warmth of knowing someone was there for me. No questions asked. I closed my eyes, finally letting sleep take over, comforted by the thought that, even when everything felt heavy, it was moments like this, shared understanding and love,